That truck is a blight on this community, Frank. An eyesore parked in violation of Section 7, subsection C, paragraph 4. It's gone, and it's not coming back unless you pay the fines, the towing fee, the impound fee, and a special beautification penalty I've just levied. Consider it a lesson in respecting the aesthetic integrity of our neighborhood. Karen, the self-appointed queen of the Crestwood Meadows Homeowners Association, stood on my lawn with her arms crossed, a smug fortress of floral print polyester, her voice dripping with the kind of condescending satisfaction that only a petty tyrant can truly master. The patch of oil-stained asphalt where my 1969 Ford F-250 had been parked for less than 12 hours was now hauntingly empty, a fresh wound in the otherwise pristine concrete of my driveway. The truck, my father's truck, the one I'd spent 3 years and a significant portion of my retirement savings restoring to showroom condition, was gone. Not stolen by some random thief in the night, but abducted in broad daylight on the orders of this woman whose only claim to authority was a laminated ID badge and an unholy devotion to the HOA covenant. I could feel the blood pounding in my temples, a familiar drumbeat from my days in the service, the one that always preceded controlled, decisive action. But on the outside, I was a statue. My face, weathered by decades of service and 2 tours overseas, remained a neutral mask. I let her words hang in the humid morning air, a toxic cloud of arrogance and bureaucratic venom. And then I met her gaze. My voice was low, dangerously calm. You had my truck towed. It wasn't a question. It was the first filing in a war she had just declared. If you know the sheer rage of having your property taken, of being trampled by someone drunk on a thimbleful of power, then subscribe to this channel right now. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from and if you've ever had your own HOA nightmare. This wasn't just about a truck. It was about a promise I made to my dad, and I was about to introduce Karen to a level of procedural warfare she couldn't possibly imagine. The story of that truck began long before Crestwood Meadows and its covenant-wielding overlord. It was my father's, bought brand new in the fall of '68. He was a builder, a man who worked with his hands, and that Ford was his partner. It hauled lumber, drywall, and a lifetime of tools. It was the vehicle I learned to drive in, its massive steering wheel a challenge for my teenage arms, its 3-on-the-tree shifter a puzzle I was determined to solve. Every dent, every scratch on its original seafoam green paint told a story. When he passed, he left it to me. It was a rusted hulk by then, sitting forlornly in the back of his barn. But the engine, a big 390 V8, was sound. "Don't let her die, Frank," he told me in his final weeks. "She's got more heart than most people." So I didn't. After retiring from the Army as a colonel in logistics, I made its restoration my mission. It was my therapy, a way to connect with the man who taught me the value of a hard day's work. I spent thousands of hours stripping it down to the frame, rebuilding the engine, sourcing original parts, and finally giving it a new coat of paint, a deep, respectful Ranger black. It wasn't an eyesore. It was a monument. I'd driven it home from the detailer's shop just yesterday, the final touch, and parked it in my driveway to admire under the setting sun. I planned to move it into the garage this morning. It hadn't even been there a full day. Karen's claim of violation was absurd. Section 7, subsection C, paragraph 4 of the HOA bylaws, which I knew by heart, prohibited the parking of commercial, recreational, or inoperable vehicles in driveways for more than 24 hours. My truck was none of those things. It was a registered, insured, and immaculately restored classic. It was personal property parked on my private land. Her action wasn't enforcement. It was a targeted act of aggression. She'd been testing me for months, with petty notices about the height of my grass or the unapproved shade of my welcome mat. She saw a retired military man, quiet and disciplined, and mistook my composure for weakness. She had no idea that my entire career was built on understanding, navigating, and when necessary, dismantling complex systems of rules and regulations. She had just weaponized a system against a master of that very system. As she stood there, radiating smug triumph, I made a silent vow. She wanted a war over rules, she would get one. She had fired the first shot, using a tow truck. My response would be quieter, more strategic, and infinitely more devastating. She thought she was teaching me a lesson. The reality was class was about to be in session, and she was the sole student. My curriculum would be based on the principles of overwhelming logistical superiority and the total, unmerciful collapse of my enemy's command and control structure. My military training kicked in before I even stepped back inside my house. The initial surge of white-hot anger receded, replaced by a cold, clear focus. Emotion is a liability in a contested zone. It clouds judgment and leads to unforced errors. Karen had made the first error. I would not make the second. I walked back to my front door, my posture erect, my steps measured. I didn't slam it. I closed it with a soft, deliberate click that seemed to echo the closing of a chapter and the beginning of a new, more contentious one. Inside, the house was quiet. My wife, Martha, was out for her morning walk, for which I was grateful. I needed a few moments to compartmentalize, to shift from retired husband to Colonel Miller, logistics and operations planner. My first stop was my study. On the bookshelf, nestled between a history of the Punic Wars and a biography of General Grant, was a thick white 3-ring binder with Crestwood Meadows HOA embossed on the spine. I took it down, the weight of it feeling heavier than usual. This was Karen's Bible, the source of her power. I was about to turn it into a weapon against her. I placed it on my large oak desk and opened it. The pages were filled with bylaws, covenants, amendments, and meeting minutes I'd collected since moving in. I had read it cover to cover twice, a habit from my due diligence days in the Army. You never enter a new theater of operations without reading the terrain, and a civilian neighborhood governed by an HOA is its own special kind of theater. I turned directly to Section 7, Vehicles and Parking. I read subsection C, paragraph 4 again. No trailer, camper, boat, commercial vehicle, or any vehicle in a state of disrepair or inoperable condition shall be parked or stored in any driveway or on any lot for a period exceeding 24 hours. The words were clear. My truck fit none of these categories. It was not a commercial vehicle. Its registration was personal. It was not in disrepair. It was arguably the most pristine vehicle in the entire 200-home subdivision. It was not inoperable. It had been driven home yesterday. And most critically, it had been there for approximately 16 hours, well under the 24-hour limit. Karen hadn't just bent the rule. She had shattered it. She had acted without legal standing, using the HOA's authority as a blunt instrument. This wasn't an interpretation. It was a fabrication. My mind began mapping out the operational phases. Phase 1, information gathering and asset confirmation. I needed to know which towing company she used, where the truck was, and under what specific authority the tow was ordered. I needed a paper trail. I picked up my phone, my thumb hovering over the number for the local police department. No, that was the wrong first step. Involving them now would be premature. This was a civil matter, and they would say so. I needed to know who held the municipal contracts. A cold smile touched my lips for the first time that morning. I scrolled through my contacts and found the entry labeled David Sell, my son. David was a lawyer, a sharp one. But he wasn't just any lawyer. He was an assistant county attorney. His specialty? Municipal contracts. He was the man who reviewed and approved the agreements between the county and its service providers, from waste management to, as fate would have it, exclusive towing and impound services. I dialed the number. He picked up on the second ring. "Hey, Dad, what's up? Everything okay?" His voice was cheerful, the sound of a young man enjoying his Saturday morning. "David, I need some information," I said, my tone flat. "All business. I'm initiating an operation, and I need to confirm the status of some key assets." There was a pause. He knew my operation voice. It was the one I used when I was building a new deck and needed him to check setback codes, or when I was fighting with the cable company. "Uh-oh," he said, a hint of amusement in his voice. "Who declared war on you now?" The HOA? I replied. They towed the Ford. The amusement in his voice vanished, replaced by the same cold anger I was suppressing. He loved that truck as much as I did. He'd spent countless hours with me in the garage, handing me wrenches, learning the difference between a gasket and a washer. She did what? He breathed. The HOA president, a woman named Karen. She had it towed from my driveway this morning. I quickly outlined the situation, the rule she cited, and the clear violation of that rule. I need to know who the county's exclusive towing contractor is for this zone, I said. I also need a copy of their contract with the county. Specifically, I'm interested in the clauses regarding authorization, liability, and indemnification when a tow is requested by a third-party entity like an HOA. David was silent for a long moment. I could practically hear the gears turning in his legal mind, the tumblers of a complex lock clicking into place. "Dad," he said finally, his voice now a low, dangerous hum that mirrored my own. "She has no idea what she's just done. I don't just review those contracts, I signed the current one. The ink is barely dry. I know every single word of that agreement by heart." Phase 1 was complete. I had my primary asset confirmed. The war was on, and the enemy had just unknowingly walked into my kill box. The dossier began as a single sheet of yellow legal paper, but I knew it would grow. My desk, usually a model of neat organization, was about to become a command center. On the top of the page, I wrote in block letters, Operation Restoration. It was fitting. This was about restoring my truck, my rights, and the rule of law to this neighborhood. I drew a line down the middle of the page. On the left, I wrote facts. On the right, actions. Under facts, I started with the basics. 1. 1969, Ford F-250 VIN, black, fully restored. 2. Parked in private driveway at my address approximately 5 p.m. Friday 3. Towed approximately 9 a.m. Saturday, total time 16 hours. 4. HOA, Rule 7C4, cited by President Karen. Rule requires 24-hour period and specific vehicle types. My vehicle does not qualify on any count. This was the bedrock of my case, the undeniable truth. Under actions, I wrote, 1. Contact David Ree, County Towing Contract. Completed. 2. Obtain official copy of towing order/report. 3. Retrieve vehicle under protest. 4. Document all costs. 5. Draft formal letter of demand to HOA board. I called the number David had given me for the county contracted tow yard. A bored-sounding man answered. I gave him my license plate number. "Yeah, we got it," he grunted. "Black Ford pickup, got picked up from Crestwood Meadows. Order came from the HOA president, Karen. What's her name? Miller? No, that's you. Peterson. Karen Peterson." "I need a copy of the authorization order," I said calmly. "You can get that when you pick it up. That'll be $450 for the tow, and it's $100 a day for storage starting now." $450. The number was obscene. It was extortion, plain and simple. "I will be there within the hour," I said, and hung up before he could say another word. The cost was just another piece of data for the dossier. I took a photo of my pristine driveway. I took a photo of the HOA binder open to the relevant page. I started a new document on my computer. A meticulously detailed log. Every phone call, every name, every dollar amount, every minute spent on this manufactured crisis would be recorded. This is how you dismantle a bureaucracy. You build a better one. You drown them in the very paperwork they worship. While I waited for Martha to get home to drive me to the impound lot, I began my digital reconnaissance. I searched for the Crestwood Meadows HOA online. They had a clunky, outdated website run by a management company Karen had hired. On it, I found a repository of documents, meeting minutes from the last 2 years. I downloaded every single one. It was time to establish a pattern of behavior. I spent the next 40 minutes skimming through the PDFs, my eyes scanning for Karen's name, and I found it. Everywhere. Motions to fine residents for trash cans left out for 3 hours instead of 2. proposals to measure the exact height of lawn grass, debates over the acceptable shades of beige for exterior paint. It was a chronicle of petty tyranny. Then I found something interesting, a recurring line item in the budget: legal consultation fees. They were spending thousands of dollars a year. On what? The minutes were vague, just mentioning covenant enforcement issues. This was a red flag. A well-run HOA with clear, reasonable rules shouldn't need a lawyer on speed dial. It suggested they were either poorly managed, overly litigious, or both. Karen's name was always attached to these motions. She was the driving force, the one pushing for more aggressive enforcement, more fines, more control. I printed out the relevant budget pages and the minutes where she argued for increased spending on legal fees. This wasn't just about a truck anymore. This was about a systemic abuse of power, funded by the residents she was tormenting. Martha arrived home then, her face flushed from her walk. She saw me at the desk, the papers spread out, the grim set of my jaw, and she knew immediately. "It's the truck, isn't it?" she asked, her voice soft. "She towed it." I just nodded. "Frank, don't do anything crazy." "Crazy is not the operational plan," I said, standing up. "Methodical is the plan. Strategic is the plan. I need a ride to the impound lot. It's time to recover my property." She looked at the papers, at the binder, at the look in my eye. She'd seen that look before, when I was preparing for a deployment, a look of absolute, unshakable resolve. She sighed, but it was a sigh of resignation, not disapproval. "All right, Colonel," she said, picking up her car keys, "well, let's go get your truck." The drive was silent. My mind was a whirlwind of logistics and legal angles. Karen had made this personal. She had taken something that represented my father, my history, but my response would be entirely impersonal, professional, and devastatingly precise. She had lit a fuse, thinking it was a firecracker. She was about to find out it was attached to a meticulously engineered demolition charge. The impound lot was a desolate gravel wasteland on the industrial outskirts of town, a graveyard for vehicles caught in the gears of bureaucracy. Barbed wire topped the chain-link fence, and a faded sign promised 24/7 secure storage. It looked more like a prison. My truck was there, parked in a row of dented sedans and work vans, looking as out of place as a thoroughbred in a glue factory. Seeing it there, held captive, sent another jolt of anger through me, but I pushed it down. I walked into the grimy office, the air thick with the smell of stale coffee and desperation. The same bored man sat behind a plexiglass barrier. I paid the $450 fee with my credit card, the price of my truck's ransom. "I need a copy of the tow authorization," I repeated, my voice even. He slid a carbon copy form through the slot. I examined it. It was a standard county form. At the top was the towing company's information. In the middle, my vehicle's details. At the bottom was the crucial section, authorizing agent. There it was in loopy, self-important cursive, Karen Peterson. And next to it, her title, President, Crestwood Meadows HOA. She had signed her name to it. This piece of paper was gold. It was the direct link, the signed confession. This document, combined with the contract my son was emailing me, formed the two jaws of the trap. On the drive home, with Martha driving our sedan and me following in my now liberated F-250, my mind was already on phase 2, community engagement. A single complaint, even a justified one, could be dismissed as a personal grudge. A chorus of complaints was a movement. I knew Karen hadn't singled me out just for fun. A personality like hers requires a constant supply of victims. I just had to find the others. I started that evening. My first stop was 2 doors down, the Wilsons. They were a young couple with 2 small children. I'd seen them receive a few of the HOA's official-looking violation letters. I found Mark Wilson in his garage trying to fix a lawnmower. "Mark," I started, keeping my voice casual. "Got a minute? I had a run-in with our HOA president today." He immediately stopped what he was doing and looked up, his face a mixture of frustration and resignation. "Don't tell me," he sighed. Let me guess. Your trash cans were visible from the street for 7 minutes too long. Worse, I said. She had my truck towed from my own driveway. His eyes went wide. You're kidding me? The black one, the classic? I saw you bring it home yesterday. It's beautiful. Karen called it a blight, I said, letting the word hang in the air. Mark shook his head in disgust. That woman is on a power trip. Last month, she sent us a certified letter and a $100 fine because the kids' sidewalk chalk drawings were unapproved graffiti. We had to scrub it off in the rain while she watched from her window. He pointed toward Karen's house, which had a direct line of sight to his driveway. The image was chilling. A petty monarch observing her subject's penance. Did you fight it? I asked. What's the point? He said, shrugging helplessly. She's the president. The board just rubber stamps whatever she wants. It's easier to just pay the fine and try to stay off her radar. Her radar is getting wider, I said, and paying her just funds her next attack. I'm not paying. I'm fighting back, and I'm documenting everything. I told him about the rules she'd broken, about the dossier I was building. A spark of hope flickered in his eyes. What can we do? He asked. For now, just write down everything that's happened to you, I instructed. Dates, times, fines, photos of the chalk drawings if you have them. Details matter. We need to build a pattern of abuse. He promised he would. My next visit was to Mrs. Gable, a widow in her late 70s who lived across the street. Her passion was her garden, a vibrant explosion of flowers and small, whimsical gnome statues. I found her tending her roses, her movements slow but deliberate. Mrs. Gable, I said gently, I'm sorry to bother you, but I'm having an issue with the HOA. Her cheerful expression clouded over instantly. Oh dear, is it about the gnomes again? She asked, her voice trembling slightly. She told me I'm only allowed 3 non-floral decorative elements per the new landscaping amendment she passed last month. I have 7. She said they're tacky and lower property values. She looked at her little collection of cheerful, pointy-hatted figures with such affection it broke my heart. She wants to fine me $50 for each extra one. That's $200. On my pension, that's a lot of money. She has no right, I said firmly. That amendment is likely unenforceable. It's arbitrary and capricious. Mrs. Gable, I want you to know you're not alone. I'm putting together a case against her. I gave her the same instructions I gave Mark. Write it all down. By the end of the evening, I had spoken to 5 other families. The stories were all variations on the same theme. A fine for a basketball hoop that was left up overnight. A warning for having a satellite dish on the wrong side of the roof, despite that being the only spot with a clear signal. A demand that a family take down a welcome home banner for their son. A Marine returning from deployment because it wasn't a pre-approved holiday decoration. Karen wasn't just enforcing rules, she was systematically stripping the humanity from the neighborhood, replacing community with compliance. Each story was a new file in my dossier, a new voice in the chorus. The war was no longer just mine. It was ours. David called me Sunday afternoon. Okay, Dad, I've got it all, he said, and I could hear the rustle of papers. He was in his office, on his own time, which told me everything I needed to know about his level of commitment. I have the executed county towing and recovery services agreement right here. I've also cross-referenced it with the state statutes on non-consensual towing from private property. Karen didn't just make a mistake, she waltzed through a legal minefield. He began to explain the contract's architecture, and I listened intently, taking notes. The county's agreement was with a single company, Apex Towing, for all official law enforcement and county-ordered tows. This exclusivity gave the county immense leverage. Here's the beautiful part, David said, his voice laced with the thrill of legal discovery. Section 4.3, Indemnification. The towing company is indemnified by the county, meaning we protect them from lawsuits if and only if the tow is ordered by a legitimate law enforcement officer or a county agent acting in their official capacity. But Karen is neither of those, I stated. Exactly, David confirmed. So, Apex Towing isn't protected by the county in this case, but it gets better. Section 4.4, TOWs initiated by third-party agents. This clause was written specifically for situations like HOAs or property managers. It states that the third-party agent, in this case Karen Peterson on behalf of Crestwood Meadows HOA, must sign a certification on the tow slip. She did, I said, looking at the carbon copy on my desk. She signed her name right on the dotted line. Of course she did. David chuckled darkly. Power trippers love signing things. That signature, Dad, is a legally binding warranty. It's a promise from her to Apex Towing that the tow is fully compliant with all applicable state laws, local ordinances, and governing private covenants. She is personally warranting that she has the undisputed legal right to order that tow. I felt a grim smile spread across my face. And she doesn't. She doesn't even come close, Swans, David said. State law is crystal clear. To tow from private residential property, the rule being enforced must be clearly posted at all entrances to the community, and the vehicle must meet the specific violation criteria. You said the signs at our entrance just say private community resident parking only? That's all they say, I confirmed. There's no mention of a 24-hour limit or specific vehicle types. Strike one, David said, and the covenants themselves give a 24-hour grace period, which she ignored. Strike two, and your vehicle doesn't even fit the prohibited categories. Strike three, she's not just out, Dad. She's committed what's known in the business as contractual fraud. She made a false representation to Apex in order to induce them to perform a service they otherwise would not have. The full weight of it settled in. Karen, in her rush to punish me, hadn't just overstepped her HOA authority, she had lied on a legal document that was part of a county contract my own son had signed. The irony was so thick I could taste it. So what's the move? I asked, my mind already shifting to the next phase. Apex is now in breach of their contract with the county, David explained. They performed an illegal tow. They are liable to you for the costs, plus any damages. But more importantly, they are terrified of losing their multi-million-dollar exclusive contract with the county. Karen, by signing that form, transferred all the liability onto herself and the HOA. She is now on the hook to Apex for any legal costs they incur because of her fraudulent authorization. We spent the next hour mapping out the strategy. It would be a two-pronged assault. Prong one, the internal offensive. I would use the evidence I'd gathered from the neighbors to launch a political campaign within the HOA to have her removed. Prong two, the external offensive. I would send a formal legal demand to Apex Towing, copying the HOA board and David's office at the county attorney's department. The demand would be simple. Refund my money, provide a written apology, and state for the record that the tow was unauthorized. Apex, facing a contract violation review from the county, would have no choice but to comply. They would immediately turn on the person who put them in that position. Karen. This is the pincer movement, Dad, David said, using a term he'd heard me use 1,000 times. We'll apply pressure from the inside and the outside simultaneously. Her power base will erode internally while her legal exposure becomes undeniable externally. She'll be caught in a crossfire. After the call, I sat at my desk and began to draft the letters. The first was to the HOA Board of Directors. It was a formal request for a special meeting, as per the bylaws, which required a petition signed by 10% of the homeowners. With the neighbors I had already spoken to, I had more than enough. The letter also included a formal notice of pending litigation, informing them of the illegal tow and the financial liability Karen had created for the entire association. The second letter was to the president of Apex Towing. It was polite, professional, and utterly uncompromising. It detailed the illegal tow, cited the relevant state statutes and contract clauses David had given me, and demanded a full refund and a formal retraction of the tow order. I attached a copy of the fraudulent authorization slip with Karen's signature circled in red. I also blind carbon copied the county attorney's office. This was the shot across the bow. It let Apex know that the county was now watching. The trap was set. The legal framework was in place. All I had to do now was wait for the gears of justice and bureaucracy to start grinding. Karen had built her kingdom on a foundation of paper. I was about to burn it down with paper of my own. The first crack in Karen's fortress appeared 3 days later. It came in the form of a phone call from a man named Stan, a member of the HOA's 3-person board of directors. Stan was a retired accountant, a quiet man who usually just went along with Karen's plans to avoid conflict. My formal notice had clearly shaken him. "Frank," he began, his voice nervous and reedy. "Stan here from the board. We got your letter and, well, we also got a letter from Apex Towing's legal department." I remained silent, letting him talk. "They're saying the tow might have been improper. They've refunded your money to the HOA's account and are asking for a meeting. Karen is furious. She's saying you're threatening her and trying to undermine the community." "Stan, the only thing I'm undermining is illegal activity," I said, my voice calm and firm. "Karen acted outside the scope of our bylaws and in violation of state law. She exposed our HOA and every member in it to significant financial and legal liability." My letter wasn't a threat, it was a statement of fact. "You're an accountant. You understand liability." I could hear him take a shaky breath. "She told us the truck was an abandoned, inoperable vehicle. She said you'd been warned multiple times." "And did she show you copies of these multiple warnings?" I asked, right, because they don't exist. "Did she show you a single photo to prove her claim?" "Number Stan, she lied to you the same way she lied on the towing authorization form. You're on the board. You have a fiduciary duty to protect the association, not Karen's ego." His silence was my answer. I had planted the seed of doubt. The board was no longer a monolith. It was now Karen and 2 very nervous men who were beginning to understand the mess she had created. The next day I began my own escalation. Armed with the petition for a special meeting, which now bore the signatures of 32 homeowners, I went door to door, not to ask for more signatures, but to distribute an information packet. Each packet contained a simple 1-page summary of the situation, a timeline of the illegal tow, a photo of my restored truck, the exact text of the rule Karen had broken, and a clear, concise explanation of the financial liability she had created. I also included a list of the other petty and potentially illegal fines she had levied against the Wilsons, Mrs. Gable, and others, all presented anonymously as case studies in HOA overreach. It was a classic information warfare tactic. Seize control of the narrative. Karen had ruled through obscurity and misinformation, her power derived from residents being too intimidated or uninformed to challenge her. I was flooding the zone with indisputable facts. Her response was predictable and clumsy. The following evening, a new notice appeared on the community bulletin board, printed on lurid pink paper. "Beware of misinformation," it screamed in a massive, bold font. "A disgruntled resident with a personal grudge is spreading lies to disrupt our peaceful community. All enforcement actions taken by your president are for the good of our property values and in accordance with the bylaws. Do not be fooled by his divisive tactics. Your HOA president, Karen Peterson." It was a masterclass in panic. The vague accusations, the appeal to a non-existent harmony, the self-aggrandizing signature, it was the desperate act of a dictator losing her grip. It was also a gift. I took a photo of the notice, a perfect exhibit for my growing file labeled Pattern of Abuse and Retaliation. She wasn't just a bully. She was now actively libeling me to the entire community. The pressure was clearly getting to her. The next morning I found another letter in my own mailbox. It was from the HOA, a formal second notice of violation. This time it was for my flagpole. I had installed it shortly after moving in, a 20-foot pole from which I flew the American flag, just as I had at every home I'd ever owned. The notice claimed it was in violation of a rule prohibiting freestanding structures not approved by the Architectural Review Committee, which Karen also chaired. The fine was $500. It was a pathetic, transparent act of retaliation. It was also another fatal error. She had no idea that the Freedom to Display the American Flag Act of 2005 is a federal law that supersedes any and all HOA restrictions on flying the flag. She had just escalated her petty neighborhood squabble into a federal issue. I looked at the violation notice, then up at the flag, waving gently in the morning breeze. She had picked a fight with a retired Army colonel over his truck. Now she was picking a fight with him over his flag. The hole she was digging for herself was getting deeper by the minute, and I was more than happy to keep handing her the shovel. I walked back inside, a cold fury burning in my chest, and opened my laptop. It was time to draft another letter, this one to be CC'd to the U.S. Department of Justice. Karen's attack on my flagpole was the tipping point. It was a move born of pure desperation, a wild swing that left her completely exposed. My response was swift and multi-pronged. First, I updated the information packet I was distributing to the neighborhood. The new version included a section on the flagpole violation, complete with a clear explanation of the Freedom to Display the American Flag Act of 2005. I highlighted the fact that our HOA president was not only violating state laws and county contracts, but was now in direct violation of federal law, exposing the HOA to even more severe legal penalties. The message was simple. Her personal vendetta was now threatening the financial stability of every single homeowner. Second, I sent a certified letter directly to Stan and the other board member, a man named Jerry. I bypassed Karen entirely. The letter was a formal demand to cease and desist harassment and retaliation. I detailed the flagpole incident as a clear act of reprisal for my challenging the illegal tow, a violation of my rights as a homeowner. I attached a copy of the federal law and politely informed them that if the violation notice was not rescinded in writing within 48 hours, I would be filing a formal complaint with the appropriate federal authorities, naming not just Karen but the entire board as complicit. I was forcing Stan and Jerry to make a choice. Were they loyal to Karen, or were they loyal to the law and their own self-preservation? The third and most critical action was to officially submit the petition for a special meeting of the homeowners. According to the bylaws, once the petition was certified with enough signatures, the board was required to schedule a meeting within 30 days. This was the endgame. This was where I would bring all the evidence into the light and let the community itself be the judge. I hand-delivered the petition to the management company's office, getting a signed and dated receipt. The clock was now ticking. Karen couldn't ignore this. She couldn't tear it down like a notice on a bulletin board. This was a formal, procedural move that she was legally bound to follow. Her reaction was even more unhinged than I anticipated. 2 days later, a memo was slipped under every door in the neighborhood. It was from Karen, of course. She announced an emergency board meeting to be held that very night in the community clubhouse. The agenda? To discuss recent threats to the community's integrity and to vote on sanctions against a resident in violation of multiple covenants. She was trying to front-run the special meeting. She was attempting to use the board, which she still controlled, to sanction or even try to suspend my rights as a homeowner before I could present my case to the public. It was a brazen power play, and it was exactly the kind of overreach I was hoping for. The notice of her emergency meeting gave me the perfect platform. I spent the afternoon on the phone, calling every person who had signed my petition and told me their story. She's trying to silence us, I told them. She's holding a sham meeting to punish me for speaking out. I need you to be there tonight, not to argue, not to shout. Just to be there, to stand in the back of the room and watch. Let her see that this isn't about one disgruntled resident anymore, it's about all of us. That evening, the clubhouse was tense. The small room was set up with a table at the front for Karen, Stan, and Jerry. Karen sat in the center, her face a mask of grim determination. Stan and Jerry looked like they were facing a firing squad, avoiding eye contact with everyone. I walked in and took a seat in the front row, placing my thick Operation Restoration binder on the empty chair beside me. A few minutes later, the neighbors started to arrive. First Mark and his wife, then Mrs. Gable, looking nervous but resolute, then the family with the basketball hoop, the man with the satellite dish, the parents of the returning Marine. One by one, they filed in, standing quietly along the back and side walls. There were nearly 40 people in the room, far more than ever attended a normal HOA meeting. They didn't speak. They just stood and watched. Karen's eyes darted around the room, her composure visibly cracking as she saw the silent crowd. This wasn't the small, controllable meeting she had planned. This was a silent rebellion. She banged a small gavel on the table. "This emergency meeting of the board of directors is now in session," she announced, her voice tight. "The first order of business is the escalating pattern of covenant violations and hostile behavior from the resident at 412 Oak Street, Mr. Frank Miller." She glared at me. "Mr. Miller has engaged in a campaign of harassment and misinformation against this board, and I am proposing a motion to levy the maximum allowable fine of $1,000 and suspend his amenity privileges for 90 days. She had just made her final fatal mistake. She had held a disciplinary hearing without giving me the required written notice and opportunity to be heard, a clear violation of the HOA's own rules, and she had done it in a room full of witnesses. I didn't say a word. I simply reached into my binder, pulled out a copy of the bylaws, and opened it to the section on disciplinary procedures. I held it up for Stan and Jerry to see, my finger pointing to the exact clause she was violating. Stan's face went pale. Jerry looked like he was about to be physically ill. The silent army at the back of the room stood watching, their presence a palpable force. Karen's motion was met with a deafening silence. She looked at Stan. "Stan, I need a second." Stan swallowed hard, his eyes flicking from my face to the crowd, then back to the bylaws in my hand. He looked at Karen, and for the first time a flicker of defiance appeared in his eyes. "No," he said, his voice barely a whisper, but it echoed in the silent room like a cannon shot. I can't, Karen. This isn't right." Karen stared at him, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. She had lost control. The tipping point had been reached. The entire community had just witnessed the collapse of her authority. The night of the failed emergency meeting was the turning point. Karen's authority had crumbled in public, witnessed by the very people she sought to control. Stan and Jerry, the two other board members, were now terrified of the legal storm she had created. They called me the next morning, their voices laced with panic, and agreed to formally schedule the special meeting I had petitioned for. They set it for 2 weeks out, giving me ample time to prepare my final presentation. The tide had turned, and now it was time to bring the full force of the flood. My preparation was meticulous, befitting a final campaign briefing. I converted my dossier into a PowerPoint presentation. I didn't want this to be an emotional rant. I wanted it to be a cold, factual indictment. I created slides for each key piece of evidence. Slide 1, a photo of my pristine truck with the title, "The Blight That Started It All." Slide 2, the text of HOA Rule 7C4 with the 24-hour time limit and vehicle type restrictions highlighted in red. Slide 3, a timeline showing my truck was parked for only 16 hours. Slide 4, a copy of the towing authorization form with Karen's signature magnified and circled. The caption read, "The signature that made our HOA liable." Then came the slides detailing the collateral damage, a slide for the Wilsons' chalk art fine titled "War on Children's Art," a slide for Mrs. Gable's gnomes, "The Great Gnome Purge," a slide for the Marines' "Welcome Home" banner, penalizing patriotism. Each one was a simple, powerful story of overreach. The next section of the presentation focused on the legal and financial consequences. I had a slide explaining the fraudulent inducement of the towing contract, using the exact language David had given me. I had a slide showing the federal law regarding the American flag, stark and undeniable. I created a summary slide titled "Our Current Legal Exposure," which listed the illegal tow, the breach of the county contract, the violation of federal law, and the pending harassment complaint. I didn't estimate a dollar amount. I simply put large red question marks, letting the homeowners' imaginations fill in the blanks of potential legal fees and judgments. My final slide was titled A Path Forward. It didn't mention Karen by name. It simply listed 3 bullet points. 1. Recall and replace the current board leadership. 2. Conduct a full independent audit of the HOA's financials and legal expenditures. 3. Form a committee to review and amend the bylaws to be fair, clear, and legally compliant. During these 2 weeks, Karen was conspicuously quiet. The pink notices vanished. There were no new violation letters. She was hunkering down, perhaps hoping the storm would blow over, but the community was buzzing. My information packets and the story of the failed emergency meeting had spread like wildfire. People were talking to each other, sharing their own stories of petty harassment. The silent resentment that had simmered under the surface for years was finally boiling over. The night of the special meeting, the community clubhouse was packed beyond capacity. We had to open the large glass doors to the patio where dozens more people stood, craning their necks to see. I had set up a projector and a screen at the front of the room. Stan and Jerry sat at the board table looking grim. Karen sat between them, her face puffy and pale, a defiant scowl etched onto her lips. She was cornered, but she wasn't broken yet. Stan, as the acting board member in charge, nervously called the meeting to order. As per the petition submitted by the homeowners, he began reading from a script, this special meeting has been called to hear a presentation from Mr. Frank Miller regarding recent HOA actions. He gestured to me. I walked to the front of the room, my binder in hand, and connected my laptop to the projector. The first slide illuminated the screen, the picture of my gleaming black Ford. A murmur went through the crowd. Good evening, I began, my voice calm and steady, projecting to the back of the room. My name is Frank Miller. Many of you know me as your neighbor. Tonight I'm here as a fellow homeowner who believes our community is at a crossroads. I clicked to the next slide. This is about rules. We all agree to live by rules when we move here, but rules must be applied fairly, legally, and without personal bias. Tonight, I'm going to present evidence that our HOA, under the leadership of Ms. Peterson, has engaged in a pattern of behavior that is unfair, illegal, and has put every single one of us at serious financial risk. For the next 20 minutes, I walked them through the presentation. I was dispassionate, sticking to the facts. I presented the timeline of the tow. I showed them Karen's signature. I explained the contract with Apex Towing. When I put up the slides about the chalk art and the gnomes, I could hear angry whispers from the crowd. People were nodding, recognizing their own experiences in the stories of their neighbors. Karen tried to interrupt twice. This is slander. These are lies, she shouted. Both times, Stan banged the gavel. Ms. Peterson, you will be silent, he said, his voice surprisingly firm. Mr. Miller has the floor. The crowd's support was a palpable force, and it had given him a spine. When I got to the slide about the flagpole and the federal law, a man in the back of the room, another veteran I'd spoken to, called out, "That's disgraceful!" A wave of applause followed. Karen sank lower in her chair. The room, her kingdom, had turned against her completely. The atmosphere in the room was electric. The homeowners, once isolated and intimidated, were now a unified body, their anger focused and directed. I had laid the factual groundwork, brick by brick, building an irrefutable case. Now it was time for the coup de grace. I clicked to a new slide. It was stark white with a single question in bold black letters. Who is paying for this? Ms. Peterson's actions have consequences, I said, my voice dropping slightly, drawing the crowd in. When she ordered my truck to be towed illegally, she triggered a series of events. Apex Towing, the company she lied to, was forced to refund the fees. But who do you think they're coming after to recoup their costs and legal fees? They're coming after our HOA. When she violated federal law by fining me for flying our nation's flag, she opened us up to federal lawsuits where legal fees can run into the tens, even hundreds of thousands of dollars. Every time she levies an arbitrary fine that gets challenged, she uses our money to pay the HOA's lawyers to defend her personal whims. I let that sink in. I could see people turning to their neighbors, whispering, the financial implications dawning on them. But the most significant liability, I continued, stems from this. I clicked again. The next slide showed the logo of the county attorney's office. When Ms. Peterson signed that towing authorization, she wasn't just dealing with a private company. She was interacting with a county contractor. She was, in effect, using a county-regulated service. By submitting a fraudulent claim, she misused that service. I paused, letting my eyes sweep across the room before finally landing on Karen. My son, David Miller, is an assistant county attorney. His name is on the master contract between the county and Apex Towing. When I was made aware of this situation, I had a duty to inform him, and he, as an officer of the court and a representative of the county, had a duty to act. A collective gasp went through the room. Karen's face, already pale, turned a ghastly shade of white. She looked like she had been physically struck. As of this morning, I announced, my voice ringing with finality, the county attorney's office has opened a formal inquiry into the fraudulent use of county contracted services by the Crestwood Meadows HOA, specifically citing the actions of its president, Karen Peterson. They are also reviewing whether Apex Towing is in breach of their contract for failing to verify the legitimacy of the tow order. Karen's personal war has now become an official county investigation. The room exploded. Not with shouting, but with a tidal wave of angry, overlapping conversations. People were on their feet, pointing at Karen, demanding answers. Stan was banging his gavel, but it was useless against the roar of a community that had finally found its voice. Karen was frozen, her eyes wide with terror. The complex web of rules and authority she had tried to wield had collapsed upon her, and now a far greater power, the county government, was involved. I raised my hand for silence, and surprisingly the room quieted. I am not here tonight to ask for vengeance, I said, looking directly at the frightened faces of my neighbors. I am here to ask for restoration. Restoration of common sense. Restoration of fiscal responsibility, and restoration of our community. I advanced to my final slide, a path forward. I am making a formal motion, as is our right under the bylaws, for a vote of no confidence in our current president, Karen Peterson, and for her immediate removal from the board of directors. Mark Wilson, the man fined for his kids' chalk drawings, jumped to his feet. I second that motion, he yelled. The room erupted in applause and cheers. Stan, looking relieved, as if a great weight had been lifted from him, called for the vote. It wasn't even a contest. A forest of hands went up in favor of the motion. When Stan asked for the nays, only one hand remained down, limp on the table in front of her. Karen's. The motion carries, Stan declared, his voice filled with emotion. Karen Peterson is hereby removed from the board of directors, effective immediately. Karen didn't speak. She didn't move. She just sat there, staring into the middle distance, a queen deposed in her own throne room, dismantled not by an army but by a PowerPoint presentation and the quiet, methodical application of her own rules against her. The battle was over. The aftermath of the meeting was like the breaking of a long fever. The tension that had gripped the neighborhood for years dissipated overnight. Karen Peterson disappeared. Her house went up for sale a week later, sold quickly to a young family who seemed delighted by the idea of kids' chalk art on the driveway. We never saw her again. There were rumors, of course. One was that the county investigation led to a significant personal fine for her, separate from any liability the HOA faced. Another was that Apex Towing's lawyers had sent her a demand letter so terrifying that she simply cut her losses and ran. I never bothered to find out the truth. It was enough that she was gone. With Karen removed, Stan and Jerry, humbled and eager to make amends, asked me to serve as an interim board member to oversee the transition. I agreed on one condition, that our first act would be to bring in an independent auditor to go through the HOA's finances for the last 5 years. The audit revealed what I had suspected. Karen had been using the HOA's legal fund as her personal slush fund for vendettas, spending tens of thousands of dollars on legal consultations to back up her petty fines. The auditor also found she had approved several no-bid contracts with a landscaping company owned by her brother-in-law, paying well above market rate. The findings were presented at the next HOA meeting, cementing the justification for her removal and paving the way for real reform. We formed a bylaw review committee made up of a diverse group of homeowners: Mark Wilson, Mrs. Gable, the Marine's father, myself, and a few others. For 2 months, we met every Tuesday night. We went through the covenant, line by line. We didn't tear it up. We surgically repaired it. We clarified vague language, removed the absurdly restrictive and subjective rules, and added provisions to protect homeowners from arbitrary board actions. The rule about non-floral decorative elements was struck entirely. Mrs. Gable's gnome army was safe, and she even added a few new ones to celebrate. The rules on parking were rewritten to be clear, fair, and focused on genuine problems like abandoned or commercial vehicles, not a classic truck parked for a few hours in its owner's driveway. The biggest change we made was to the enforcement process. We instituted a mandatory multi-step process: a friendly warning, a formal written notice, and then a hearing before the full board where the homeowner had the right to present their case before any fine could be levied. We took the power out of the hands of a single person and placed it in a system of checks and balances. The HOA even issued a formal, written apology to every homeowner who had been unjustly fined under Karen's reign and refunded their money from the association's reserve funds. It was the right thing to do. The day my restored F-250 was finally truly finished with its ordeal was a Saturday in late summer. As per the settlement forced by the county's inquiry, the HOA's insurance paid to have the truck professionally inspected and detailed to repair any minor scratches it might have sustained at the impound lot. It was delivered to my house, gleaming under the afternoon sun, looking even better than it had before. The black paint was like a mirror. That evening, Martha and I hosted a barbecue. We invited the whole neighborhood. The Wilsons came, their kids drawing a giant, colorful dragon on our driveway with a massive box of chalk I'd bought for them. Mrs. Gable arrived with a platter of her famous cookies and a brand new gnome for my garden, a cheerful fellow holding a tiny sign that read Liberty. The Marine's family was there, and I thanked his father for his son's service. David came over with his wife and kids, my grandkids, who immediately climbed into the bed of the F-250 laughing. I stood on my porch, a cold beer in my hand, and looked out at the scene. My truck, my father's legacy, sat proudly in the driveway, not as a source of conflict, but as a symbol of our victory. Kids were playing, neighbors were laughing, and the air was filled with the smell of grilled burgers and the sound of a community healing. We hadn't just defeated a petty tyrant. We had reclaimed our neighborhood. We had replaced fear with friendship and arbitrary rule with common sense. My house was no longer just a property governed by a covenant. It was a home, in a community, and for the first time in a long time, it truly felt free. The war was over. The restoration was complete.